Morning. It's nice to have everybody here today. Thank you for coming. We're excited to be back on the campus of Dakota State University and want to thank DSU and President Griffiths for hosting us here today. Also want to thank our distinguished panelists. There are a lot of people who've traveled far and wide to get here today to join us for this, and so I wanted to say a special thank you to all of you and to all of the community members, students, faculty that might be in the audience today. Welcome. We're here today. It's a National Cybersecurity Awareness Month, the month of October, to discuss cybersecurity challenges that U.S. businesses and government agencies face, including issues pertaining to workforce and skills development, as well as some of the exciting academic and research initiatives that are going on right here at DSU. As most of you know, Dakota State University has developed a well-earned national reputation for its cybersecurity programs. And I'm pleased to note that the university has recently received a substantial investment commitment of $60 million to expand upon its exceptional programs and to build a 40,000 square foot facility here, cybersecurity facility, called the Madison Cybersecurity Laboratories, or nicknamed Mad Labs. With this investment, DSU is well positioned to become a hub of innovation and applied cybersecurity research that will benefit both the public and private sectors. The numerous recent breaches and cyber attacks, including those at Equifax, Yahoo, the Office of Personnel Management, to name just a few, make clear that cybersecurity remains a persistent challenge. The students in the audience today represent the next generation of cybersecurity professionals that we need to protect our networks, our intellectual property, critical infrastructure, and sensitive personal information. And it's a huge task, but one that I'm confident that you all are up to. As chairman of the Senate Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation, cybersecurity has been a priority of mine for several years. The committee's held numerous hearings on cybersecurity related issues ranging from the skills gap, workforce development and education, to the cybersecurity opportunities and challenges that are presented by emerging technologies such as blockchain, artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and self-driving vehicles, and the expanding threat surface of the Internet of Things, all subjects on which we've had hearings in front of the Senate Commerce Committee. 2 years ago, the Commerce Committee even held a field hearing right here at Dakota State University to highlight the risks of cybersecurity and to showcase DSU's capabilities and talent pool in this field. We also passed a bipartisan law that I sponsored along with, at that time, the committee's former chairman, called the Cybersecurity Enhancement Act of 2014, which made permanent the voluntary cybersecurity framework for critical infrastructure and the National Initiative for Cybersecurity Education, or NIST, both led by the Commerce Department's National Institute of Standards and Technology, known as NIST. That law also made permanent the National Science Foundation Cyber Core Scholarship for Service program, in which Dakota State University has been a major participant. It's a program that's enabled many students from DSU to go on to important careers with the federal government. And this year, the Commerce Committee and the full Senate have already passed two pieces of legislation relevant for our discussion today. The Main Street Cybersecurity Act, which I am a co-sponsor of, requires NIST to develop resources as part of the cybersecurity framework for small businesses to reduce cyber risks. And it's particularly pressing today, given the fact that small businesses account for 54% of all the sales in this country and 55% of the jobs. The Cybersecurity Scholarship Opportunities Act of 2017, which I also co-sponsored, updates and enhances NSF's Cyber Core Scholarship for Service program to expand job placement opportunities for nonprofit critical infrastructure organizations affiliated with state and local governments. The Act also calls for a pilot program and assesses the feasibility of providing Cyber Core scholarships directly to students attending community colleges who are pursuing associate degrees or specialized certifications in cybersecurity. And then just last week, the Commerce Committee approved the AV START Act that I introduced along with Senator Gary Peters of Michigan. And this legislation, which seeks to facilitate the deployment of self-driving vehicles, also addresses the cybersecurity of such vehicles. Among other things, the bill directs the Secretary of Transportation to work with manufacturers of automobiles to adopt policies regarding the disclosure of potential cybersecurity vulnerabilities. It also requires manufacturers to develop and implement comprehensive written plans for identifying and reducing cybersecurity risks to self-driving vehicles. So there's no silver bullet, I think it's fair to say, solution to solving cybersecurity risks. But I believe that Dakota State University's innovative approach to cybersecurity education, as well as its expanded efforts to conduct cutting-edge research through Mad Labs, will play a crucial role in closing the cybersecurity skills gap and solidifying its role as a cybersecurity leader. So with that, I want to again welcome all of you here, and I want to flip it now to Dr. Griffiths to give her an opportunity to just a quick overview of some of the exciting developments that are taking place here at Dakota State University, and then I'll turn to our panelists for some quick introductions and what I think will be a very informative discussion. So thank you all for being here. Dr. Griffiths.
Thank you, Senator Thune. We're pleased to have you back here on campus, and welcome to all of our panelists and your colleagues, and welcome to the community and the students. We see you a lot, but we're really glad you're here today to listen to what goes on. Those of you who are just new to the campus, this building has been open for 6 weeks. It's our newest academic building. It contains classrooms, teaching labs, hands-on experiential teaching labs, and large collaboration spaces. A lot of collaboration goes on in this space and underneath the stairway and around the corners and so on. So we're pleased you're here. In 1984, Dakota State University was given a new mission to focus on computing and information technology, and that was to be our focus, and it has done that well. In 2004, the university started its first cybersecurity academic program in information assurance and has grown its program since that point. A lot of people seem to think cybersecurity is one academic discipline. It's not, it's multiples. If you think about a team, let's take our football team that's doing very well right now. We need an offense, we need a defense, we need special teams, we need trainers, managers, coaches, athletics directors, etc. I mean, all of that. It's the same thing in cybersecurity. We need people with different areas of expertise to come together in either offensive or defensive arrangements. But at Dakota State, we've now built so that we have a sort of stackable series of credentials from certificate programs, which can stack into associate degree programs, which can stack into bachelor's degree programs, and then we have master's degrees and doctoral degrees in the area of various areas of cybersecurity. We have been fortunate that the National Security Agency and Department of Homeland Security have designated us 4 academic centers of excellence designations, which have just been renewed, so we have those designations through 2022. They're in cyber defense, education and research, in cyber operations, which is perhaps the most technical area of cybersecurity, and we have a regional consultative resource center. We're responsible for helping the development of personnel in multiple states around South Dakota. So those are all underway. Senator Thune mentioned to you our plans for another new building. It's going to be about 25% larger than this one, to give you some sense. It's going to be on the other side of the campus, and it's going to be focused on applied R&D in a variety of different areas related to cybersecurity. And we have these areas have been defined by our faculty, who are already working on partnerships and grants and contracts, getting students involved. We're launching a major new initiative in undergraduate research so that our undergraduate students can be more involved in research while they're here. But the Madison Cyber Labs is a very, very exciting development, not just for Dakota State University. The intent of the labs is really the creation of jobs. So we hope to have a lot of full-time researchers, we hope to have partner organizations working alongside us, and we hope to make a significant impact on the local economy here in Madison, in East River, as we call it, and eventually across the entire state of South Dakota. We believe this is an opportunity, not just for Dakota State, but an opportunity for South Dakota as we think about how do we expand the potential numbers of cyber professionals that are available to do the work. So I think that's sort of a little bit of what's going on. I could go on forever, and I don't want to. I'm a former faculty member, so I can talk in 3 hours. Right.
Thank you, Dr. Griffiths. And it's really exciting. It's been just fun to watch, and I'm hoping that some of our panelists here and their organizations will decide to expand their operations to South Dakota and create jobs here in our state too. But we do have a very distinguished panel with us today, all of whom represent organizations that are integrally involved with the issue of cybersecurity. And so I want you to hear from them, and I've asked them to be brief in terms of their introductions. They're only take about a minute, which I know it's hard to say anything in a minute, to just say who they are and sort of what they do. But I really want to reserve as much time as we possibly can to open it up and make this very interactive, so you all get an opportunity to hear from them on some specific questions that we might have and that you might have as well. But on my right and your left is Mr. Mark Ryland, who's Director and Solutions Architect of Amazon Web Services. Next to him is Mr. Rick Nath, who is Site President at Citibank. Next to him is Dr. Rodney Peterson, who's the Director of the National Initiative for Cybersecurity, Cybersecurity Education, and he's at the National Institute of Standards and Technology. Mr. Chris Murphy, who's the Lead Counsel and Chief Privacy Officer at General Motors. Mr. David Lieber, who is a Senior Privacy and Cybersecurity Policy Counsel at Google. Mr. Bill Wright, who is the Director of Government Affairs and Senior Policy Counsel at Symantec. And Mr. Suri, and I say it, help me, last name.
Sunil, Seshadri.
Thank you. All right, and he's Senior Vice President, Chief Information Security Officer at Visa. So, terrific panel, and so if you can start over here, Mark, and perhaps allow you to just make some brief comments, and then we'll move around and go from there. Welcome.
Thanks. Again, my name is Mark Ryland. I'm the Chief Architect with the Public Sector team at Amazon Web Services, so my team works with government, education, not-for-profits, in helping them use the Amazon Cloud Platform. But of course, I represent Amazon as a whole, and we have a lot of other interesting businesses, many of which have the impact of cybersecurity is critical for those. Everything from IoT to self-driving cars to so many other topics. It's great to be here and to talk about our view. Cloud can really improve the overall cybersecurity posture of government and business.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks for being here. Rick.
Rick Nath. I'm with Site President with Citibank, South Dakota. I'm also an application manager in charge of development for all of our customer service applications that we support in the credit card industry. We're here as a good partner of DSU and look to represent the financial services and the risks that we have in cybersecurity today.
Thanks, Rick. And we jumped a little bit out of order here, but next up is David Lieber. David.
Thank you, Senator Thune, and thank you for inviting me to appear at the Roundtable today, as well as you, Dr. Griffiths. It's a great opportunity. I'm David Lieber. I'm Senior Privacy and Cybersecurity Policy Counsel for Google. We are a small startup based in, no, just kidding. I want to. It is, we work on, we have, as many of you know, a number of different products and services that many of you use. 7 of them now have over 1 billion users. So for us, tackling this challenge, it's a variegated one. And we're facing a lot of challenges, ongoing and emerging threats. Looking forward to discussing that a little bit more today.
Thanks, David. Thanks for being here, Chris.
So I'm Chris Murphy. I'm lead counsel for privacy and product cybersecurity, as well as chief privacy officer at General Motors, a company out of Detroit that makes cars. And thank you, Senator Thune and Dr. Griffiths, for having us here. It's a really most impressive facility that you've created, and we appreciate your recognition of cybersecurity as being critically important, and what you're doing here in terms of the threshold of giving us the resources to enact cybersecurity with your students is, that's the precedent we need, and shouldn't just be lauded, but should be emulated around the country. So my role is twofold. I oversee every data-dependent initiative that comes through the company, as well as from a product cybersecurity side, as we're developing products and services with the vehicle ecosystem, in particular autonomous vehicles. As you know, your recent legislation is critical to paving the way for that. We try to make sure that we've addressed cybersecurity at every point in the product design, development, and maintenance program.
Thanks, Chris. And just for those of you who think that autonomous vehicles is out there in the 2030 time frame, you ought to see what these guys are doing. It's coming up on us, and it's coming fast. But one of the issues that we're going to have to deal with in that exciting technology is cybersecurity. So thank you for being here. Rodney.
So good morning, everyone, and thank you again, Senator Thune and Dr. Griffiths, for the invitation. Much of my background now as the director of the National Initiative for Cybersecurity Education actually comes from academia, and since many of you are either students, faculty, staff here, I want to remind you that colleges and universities are going to develop and discover the next generation of solutions, some of which we'll talk about here today. Also, you own and operate some of the most powerful computer networks and systems in the world. And I know from Dr. Griffith's former role as a CIO and my work at the University of Maryland and Michigan State University, that's a very big undertaking. But also colleges and universities are going to educate and train the next generation of cybersecurity professionals. And that's where NIST really enters the equation. As part of the National Institute of Standards and Technology, we really lead an interagency effort. So we work closely with the NSA and DHS that were mentioned previously, also the National Science Foundation, the Departments of Education, the Department of Labor, who's looking at employment and apprenticeship opportunities. And not only across the federal government, we work closely with state governments and then certainly with academia and the private sector as well. So our goal really is to help to promote and energize a robust and integrated ecosystem of cybersecurity education, training, and workforce development.
Thanks, Rodney. Bill.
Thank you. My name is Bill Wright. I'm Director of Government Affairs for Symantec. For those of you who may not have heard of Symantec, we're the world's largest pure-play cybersecurity company. We are in 157 countries. Today we are really facing an evolving threat. What I consider probably the challenge of this generation is to stay ahead of that so we can have the kind of internet economy and digital economy that is coming. So that's why it is so important what you're doing here at DSU and other places to really try to develop the expertise that we're really going to need for the future here. My role is to work directly with academia and other governments in information sharing and a lot of the policy issues that are coming along with cybersecurity. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. Sunil.
Thank you, Senator Thune and Dr. Griffiths, for inviting me over. My name is Sunil Seshadri. The name means cyber warrior. I'm kidding. So I'm a senior vice president and the chief information security officer for Visa. And for folks unfamiliar with the company, we are a global technology payments company that connects consumers, businesses, financial institutions, governments in over 200 countries and territories to be able to do payments digitally, moving away from cash and check. So I run cybersecurity for Visa globally, including governance, risk, policy aspects of it, cyber defense, cyber operations, security architecture, identity and access management, the whole gamut from cradle to grave.
Thanks, Sunil. Thanks for being here. And as you can see, this is a great expertise and unique perspectives on the challenges of cybersecurity represented on the panel today. And so I want to throw open a first question, and it has to do with one of the recurring themes that I often hear, and that's the growing need for skilled cybersecurity professionals. And again, I'm very proud that students here at Dakota State University are answering that call to protect our nation's networks, our critical infrastructure and intellectual property. Could each of you sort of just elaborate perhaps on how your offices approach hiring cybersecurity professionals in light of what we see out there as an apparent shortage? And then as a follow-up to that, what are the skills that our future cybersecurity professionals or warriors need to have? So what do you look for, and then perhaps a little bit more specifically skill set? So Mark, go ahead.
Thank you. We look wherever we can look to find the skills we need, so it's a challenge. We try to, hire people all the way from very advanced in their career to even entry-level hiring with internal training. We're looking across the spectrum of backgrounds. The people that we need to find are the ones that are hard to find, so we do everything we can. And we also get very involved in education and training, so we provide online training. We have a program called AWS Educate where we actually work with colleges and universities to provide cloud-specific skills for their curricula and so forth. So it's a variety of things, and there's no simple answer. The good news for us is we have a very large and powerful and interesting platform, so it's a very attractive place to work. If you're a cyber engineer who can impact millions of customers with your work through a large scale cloud platform, that's a very attractive thing to do. And the nice thing there is it raises, the rising tide lifts all the boats. So everything from Citi and Visa and other sophisticated customers using cloud platforms to the mom and pop shop on Main Street, all using a common, highly virtual, highly software-defined environment, can take advantage of the improvements that we make to the platform. So it's a challenge, but so far we're able to find the folks. But believe me, you produce more of them, we'll hire them. It's a fantastic opportunity, and we can talk more about sort of skills and development as well. So I think the thing there is the key thing is we're kind of in this remedial phase, I would say, with cybersecurity. We have built a lot of systems that were poorly designed, and we're seeing kind of the fruits of not following best practices, and we're kind of remediating a lot. But as we do go through that remediation phase and begin to build more powerful platforms with people following best practices, the skills we're going to need will almost always involve some kind of degree of software engineering skills. So when you find any task that humans do continually, you ought to automate that, because humans make mistakes, and if you write your software correctly and you bug it, it's not going to make mistakes. So automation skills, machine learning skills, software development skills across the board are very, very important for anyone we hire, whether they're doing cybersecurity work or other types of technical work.
Okay, thanks, Mark.
I would echo that same thought. When we look at what we're looking for in individuals in the cybersecurity space, we really look for a couple areas in particular: detection and prevention. We're looking for those individuals, and we know the curriculum fairly well here at Dakota State, and we're very comfortable with what the students here are doing and producing, and we've had great success with them on site. And so, similar to what Mark said, looking for those characteristics, in addition to being technical, competent, we also look for the ability for them to communicate. It's not just enough for them to be able to do the work, but they also have to be able to inform us and relate to us how things are working. Because without that ability to educate, carry on, and communicate their findings and how they're going about things, it makes it difficult in our day-to-day work. So just as important as being technically smart, you also have to be able to communicate your thoughts and ideas clearly for us.
Okay, thanks, Rick. David?
Yeah, I would echo those sentiments as well, and I wanted to refer to something that Dr. Griffiths alluded to earlier, which is that cybersecurity is increasingly a multidisciplinary field. And so while all of us who are looking to hire cybersecurity professionals focus on engineering and computer science education, we're also focused on diversity too. And for Google and for other tech companies, this is a significant challenge, and one we're hoping to rise to address. One of the things that we've been doing in terms of sort of building that next generation of cybersecurity professionals, focusing in particular on women. Your girls in middle school, about 74% of them express an interest in science, technology, engineering, or math in middle school. By the time they get to high school, only 4% of them express an intent to pursue computer science as a major in college. And so we need to close that gap, and we're working on initiatives to do that. One of them that we've sponsored and other companies are working with us now on is called Made with Code, that teaches computer science education skills for girls and gets them interested at a younger age. But I think that's one of the things that we're going to have to do to address what people often refer to as the pipeline problem. We have to have young women who are interested in pursuing computer science education. We have to harness their talents, and that's something I think we're increasingly focused on.
Thank you, David. Chris?
So from the automotive standpoint, historically, the resources we've attracted were electrical engineers and mechanical engineers. And then as the evolution of the vehicle to a connected device has required more computer science engineers, what we've tried to do is partner with universities so that you can get people interested in the space and believe that they're going to find challenges that will motivate them professionally at the outset. So we've looked to partner in key areas throughout the country where we believe that millennials in the next generation will want to work. We continue looking to do that and trying to find places that have, much like DSU, where they've taken cybersecurity to such another level as an academic credential. That's key to us, is trying to partner at an early stage with you. But in terms of the talent that we're looking for, from a cybersecurity standpoint, engineering and mechanical engineering, it can be very linear. When you're thinking about trying to put cybersecurity at the forefront, you need nonlinear thinkers. You need people who are trained to think like hackers. And what's being done here and what we found with some of our other partners is you need to embed that at an early stage. You need the creative thinking to figure out who are the people who are going to threaten your products and your services. How do I think like them in order to prevent them from compromising our systems? And that's one of the pieces that we've been trying to put together in terms of attracting and retaining resources.
Interesting. Very good. Okay, Rodney?
So the federal government enacted a federal cybersecurity workforce strategy in 2016, and it thinks comprehensively about kind of the HR life cycle from recruitment to hiring to development and retention. And we are working really hard to especially focus on that recruitment and hiring aspect. For example, this month, the Centers of Academic Excellence have a career fair that's not exclusive to federal government hiring, but private sector employers as well. The Scholarship for Service program has a virtual hiring fair this month, which is not only for permanent employment, but for summer internships. And then the Federal CIO Council is offering in early November a federal cybersecurity hiring fair where they're expecting to hire hundreds, if not thousands, of new people into cybersecurity in the federal workforce. But it doesn't stop there. It's really important in cybersecurity that you recognize this is a field of continuous learning and development. And so the commitment to professional development and training is part of that comprehensive approach to not only recruiting, but then the final stage is retaining the cybersecurity workforce to make sure that they're not only being personally rewarded and developed, paid and compensated accordingly, but they're being challenged. So that's the federal strategy. With respect to the skills or the knowledge that employees need, that's where NIST has developed a NIST cybersecurity workforce framework. The NIST framework was published for the first time in August as part of NIST special publications. And the framework sets out, much as Dr. Griffiths described, 7 broad categories of work. The one you might think about the most is the protect and defend. That's kind of core cybersecurity. We need to prevent, we need to defend our networks. But also it has work roles with respect to investigation and incident handling. We unfortunately know there's a lot of security breaches and the need to respond and recover from incidents. But more importantly, it talks about securely provisioning. So when you talked about software developers, there's a whole category of work that talks about securely provisioning systems and networks. And quite frankly, one of the tools that we've developed is called CyberSeek. Cyberseek.org lays out an interactive jobs heat map to let you know the number of jobs available locally in South Dakota, across the nation, and the types of jobs available according to the NICE framework. And the number 2 category and the biggest growth is in the securely provisioned category. So finally, the way that framework is organized is it starts with identifying tasks. What do you need to have done? Because there's not a single answer to the skills that people need. It really comes down to the type of work they need to do. And from that task, the framework talks about the type of knowledge, skills, abilities that are necessary to perform those tasks. And then that, of course, rolls up into actual job descriptions or work roles, job titles, if you will. So we think that framework is a helpful model for academic institutions, training organizations, certainly for employers to use as well.
Thanks, Rodney. Bill?
Thank you. So there are different estimates out there right now, but I think it's safe to say that there's about 1 million unfilled cyber jobs in the United States right now. It's pretty extraordinary. I only wish that when I was graduating as a political science major, there was that same kind of draw. There was not. So we do have a shortage, as Senator Thune said early on. There is no silver bullet to this. At Symantec, we address this shortage in a number of ways. One is very aggressive, very active recruiting, places like DSU, trying to provide competitive salary, but also good work-life balance. We also do some other things to try to take advantage of the talent that we already have within Symantec. So if you are in a traditional IT role, we try to see whether there's some interest and capacity to then get into cybersecurity. So really looking within the company and converting some of those roles. Each year we do something called Cyber War Games. It's internal. It allows a lot of our professionals to hone their skills in both defending and attacking, because you need both sides of that to understand the attacker. And every year we end up finding someone that is not sort of on our radar as a cybersecurity expert, just shows up and is somehow able, has a particularly keen in the cybersecurity world. We'll sort of train them and sort of move them along. We also really try to prime the pump, as was mentioned, getting people in the pipeline, having proper STEM background is very, very important through our K through 12. Over the last year, we've trained over 1 million kids through different programs on STEM areas. And so those are kind of the ways that we are dealing with this challenge of a shortage of cybersecurity experts. And I'm very enthused to hear everything that DSU has going on, because I think that that's really, really going to be important.
Thanks, Bill. Sunil.
For me, at Visa, I have the distinct privilege of working with an extraordinary set of cybersecurity professionals. It is a foundational building block for the company. It has been for the past, present, and the future success. Given what we do in the global economy, we deal with 17,000 banks around the world, between 45 million merchants, over 3 billion cards issued in the global economy, over $10 trillion authorized on our technology platforms every year. The room for big mistakes in cybersecurity is very, very small, given that equation. So when I look back upon in the last 3.5 years, we have nearly tripled the cybersecurity team in terms of the workforce, but we are never done. If I look back or play forward, by the end of 2018, we anticipate close to 40% of the cybersecurity workforce will come in through what we call as NCGs, New College Graduate Programs. So what, Dr. Griffiths, the programs that you're running is very foundational to the success of what companies like Visa do, and in terms of our growth, and in terms of our ability to protect the broader ecosystem. So it's too important, it's too foundational, it's a space you just can't go too wrong.
Dr. Griffiths.
Thank you. I asked if I could just respond a little bit. There are a couple of things that were mentioned that are very germane to our developments right now. We too believe that we need to do more work with pipeline development. That's very, very critical. We have a project underway now to define a cybersecurity curriculum at different grade levels, expected outcomes principles that match the computer science national principles and curricula. But we would like then to see, what we're hoping to do is to get that permeated through all the schools in the state and beyond. And we're doing that work through our regional consultative resource center. Very, very critical. We also have an initiative and a Madison Cyber Labs activity focused on young girls, starting with middle school. It's called the Cyber Initiative with a capital H-E-R, and that's a name that belongs here. And we have a variety of different activities, but we do bring in middle school girls for a focused summer camp. We bring in co-ed camps for high schoolers. They've been funded by NSA through NSF, and those have been very, very successful. But we think that's not enough. So I would identify, we have sort of in our strategy 2 force multipliers, one of which is the K through 12 pipeline, and the second of which is the military, veterans and National Guards people. We think we have an opportunity to work with them directly. We've done some to articulate the kinds of technical training that they've had and the coursework they've gone through, match it to where it sort of mirrors what we offer, and then allow them to carry those credits into our programs and then complete their degrees at whatever level, associate degree, bachelor's degree, or go on to a master's degree. So those are 2 very, very important populations that I think will help us begin to get at these 1 million+ numbers that are projected. In fact, every day they seem to go up. The last one I heard was 1.8. But next week it's probably 2 million.
Well, it's a target-rich environment, let's put it that way, so it'll be good for. All right, just a sort of a quick question for whoever wants to talk about this, but I mentioned earlier that we've held Commerce Committee hearings on some of the emerging technologies that are out there, like artificial intelligence and blockchain and quantum computing, and their relevance to the future of cybersecurity. And so I want to ask you to sort of look into your crystal balls, and if you can say, it gives us some guidance about what the emerging trends in cybersecurity are, whether that's specific to technological innovation, some of the things I just mentioned, or workforce or skill development that you view as particularly challenging heading into the future. If Dr. Griffiths and Dakota State University and you're looking down the road and trying to prepare a workforce that's equipped and skilled to deal with those challenges in the future, what are sort of the specific things that you think are going to be particularly challenging?
Oops.
Yes,
I can
Bill.
jump in here. I think one on the sort of the technological side would be the Internet of Things. They seem obvious, but within the next 10 years, I think we will have 50 billion things connected to the Internet, and that's billion with a B. Each one of them right now, or most of them, are being produced without any security in mind. Opens up huge threats. If you look back just last year at the Mirai botnet, it brought down a pretty good size of the Internet. I think that is probably a taste of things to come. It's a very difficult problem. It's from a regulatory point of view very difficult, but also from a technological point of view very difficult to sort of bolt on security afterwards. Really needs to be sort of pushed in. I think on the plus side, I think artificial intelligence is going to play a big role in the cyber defenders in the future. I think that's a big area, and also, of course, quantum and blockchain, I think, will also be big areas.
Anybody else?
Yeah, no, I would say from our perspective, artificial intelligence is going to be critical. I think if you look at cybersecurity generally, the human factor is one of the most difficult ones to account for. We've all read about the Equifax breach. They had a vulnerability, they had an available patch. It wasn't installed in a timely fashion. One of the quotes from some of the hearings is, "You can't fix stupid." And one of the things that artificial intelligence will potentially try to do is account for the stupidity of the human factor. So on the plus side, it will be a great aid in defending, but then if used maliciously, it can also advance attacks because you're taking advantage of the human factor. And we think that's going to be the convergence of those two aspects are going to be probably one of the most difficult challenges to account for.
From a financial services perspective, things are changing rapidly. If you look at Uber, for instance, Uber transformed the taxi business. And as we look at financial services, that's traditionally been what you would call a big box type of industry. Large banks have control of a lot of data. But that's starting to change. There's new open API standards that are coming into place. You're seeing things where aggregators, we call them, things like Mint, all trying to use your data to give you a better financial experience. But as we open those APIs up and as we have a broader expanse of how those things are interacted with you and your financial data on a daily basis, it's critical that we continue to be strong in how we identify those threats and kind of beat them to the punch. We know technology can be used for tremendous good, but there's also that opportunity for mischief. So I think as we look at open APIs and things continue to expand, that's a good opportunity for us to step in and be preventative.
And two things I would comment on from a workforce perspective. One is the increased automation will potentially reduce the number of jobs required in certain areas like protect and defend. We've seen that with intrusion detection systems, security event monitoring system, and that's certainly an innovation that will continue to happen and that is needed. But remember, those innovations and developments have to be discovered and created by somebody, and that's where that securely provisioned category I talk about. And quite frankly, the role of a university, whether it's the R&D conducted here or within a corporation. So, I'm pleased to see even the proposed legislation on the scholarships that could potentially be used for faculty positions or teaching positions, because quite frankly, we have a shortage of faculty and academics to help lead this up and coming area. The second thing, back to securely provision again, is the emerging technology areas, which are going to be coming fast and furious, need to be built with security built in, and security by design, privacy by design, and even accessibility by design. And as we put more of an emphasis on emerging technologies and innovation, security work roles within even those emerging technology categories is going to become increasingly important.
Just out of curiosity, to speak to Rodney's point, in January of this year, NIST released its updated draft of the framework, version 1.1, I think, which expanded on the scope of the original framework. And when it came out, it was kind of designed, I think, for critical infrastructure, but it's been more widely adopted than that. Just question for folks around here, how many of you use or have adopted the NIST framework? And then the second question, which I think is a really, I'd like to know the answer to this question, is if from your organization's standpoint, as you look at cybersecurity, how do you measure success of your programs? I mean, obviously not being hacked would probably be, but I mean, if you could give us a sort of an insight into how you feel when you're operating in a way that's successful, but first specifically address the question of whether or not you use the NIST framework.
I can give you my point of view. I mean, I think NIST has been fundamental for us in terms of developing our sort of security controls, but it's also one of many that we benchmark ourselves against. We look at PCI, Payment Card Industry Set of Standards. We look at FFIEC, the Federal Financial Institution Examination Council Set of Standards. There is SSAE 16. There is Sarbanes-Oxley 404 compliance that we need to abide by. While there is a great deal of overlap between the controls, we adopt, by and large, we take the best of breed across the board, and we map it out to how we are performing against each one of those. The second part of your question, Senator Thune, was in terms of how do we measure the success of the program. At Visa, we look at it from a few different angles. One is there is a very rigorous controlled self-assessment process in terms of having a very honest view in terms of how well we do our jobs in cybersecurity for Visa. And we use a set of CIS, critical security controls, and to the like in terms of being able to pressure test ourselves. Second thing is we bring in third-party experts on an annual basis, on a routine basis, to benchmark ourselves against the capability maturity matrix. How are we progressing against policies, process, people, technology across on a year-in, year-out basis in a very detailed manner? The third line of defense is essentially from an audit perspective, from an internal, external audit perspective. How do those independent voices look at the program, and what is the point of view? We triangulate these 3-4 different areas, and we give a scorecard based on that. And that is a very objective view in terms of how we report back to the executive management and to the board. So the question is, we're always seeing, though every one of these attributes, do we see eye to eye with them, or where are those room for improvements? So that keeps us very grounded in terms of the approach.
Anybody else?
Yeah.
I was
Sorry.
going to
Oh, please.
just echo a lot of those comments. It's interesting, if you provide a public cloud service like we do, that you actually need to operate under a lot of different compliance regimes. So we have customers in the credit card industry, PCI DSS level 1. We operate under all the controls. We're audited by third parties. We do that for FedRAMP. We do that for a whole slew of things. In fact, you might be surprised, one of the early, most rigorous compliance regimes that we first encountered was the Motion Picture Industry Association compliance regime. Turns out the value of a digital movie before release is astronomical. And so the industry has very, very strict controls and very tight security around their use of technology platforms. So across, by satisfying these overlapping but very somewhat divergent sets of compliance regimes, and as well as working with our internal teams and external, third-party testers, and developing secure development lifecycle, and then, creating metrics and measuring progress on that. I mean, we're all doing, I think, those kinds of things. And to me, the NIST framework was really a codification of a lot of things the industry was doing already. So it's been useful, but it was sort of like, thank you for writing it down, but we were sort of doing that to some extent. But it's been helpful as well. But the thing that I want to emphasize now is we take those same capabilities and try to provide them to our customers. So for example, we have something we call the NIST 853 acceleration, where you can literally take a CloudFormation template, which is an automation framework we provide, and you can run this code, and it will stand up a 3-tier web application for you, and it will show you how we've helped you to meet every single one of the controls in that framework. So we're trying to make it so customers can more easily build secure systems using automation on a cloud platform, and so that it's not a manual process every single time and bespoke things built over and over again by humans. We really want to get to that level of automation. So putting all those things together, I think, there's a lot we can do, and things will get better when people use these modern tools.
Yeah, the NIST framework is, I think, useful in part because it's calibrated toward protecting critical infrastructure, and so it forces others that are in an ecosystem to sort of boost themselves up to a higher standard, knowing that that's, oriented toward the protection of critical infrastructure. I think, like my other panelists, we also measure and audit ourselves against a number of other industry standards. And I think the challenge for any company that's providing products or services to millions of users is we also have very, custom-oriented security protocols. You look at our data centers, and we custom-built our servers that live inside of our data centers. The operating systems we develop for those services are slimmed down in part so we're not introducing new vulnerabilities or attack vectors. And so we do try, in that vein then, to set our own standards to make sure that we're meeting our own protocols and ensuring that our users ultimately are not subject to the types of, I think, attacks and hacks that we've seen in the press.
Okay. I've got other questions I can ask, but I thought it might be useful too if there are questions that students or anybody has, any of the panelists up here on any of the subjects that have been raised today. Is anybody, not just students, but those of us that are non-students as well. Anybody have any, yes?
Interested of international aspect of cybersecurity, because we know there is no borders in criminal cases. Right. In cybersecurity. I am Estonian, and NATO Cyber Center is. So is there any cooperation now between international cybersecurity centers and particularly this NATO cybersecurity?
Sounds good. I know a lot of you operate.
It's an international issue, it's not domestic.
Right.
We know that.
Well, I know you operate internationally, and Bill, you mentioned you're in 157 countries, I think you said. So anybody want to take a crack at that one?
I'll just say, there is a lot of cooperation going on. I can just speak for Symantec, but we work very closely with governments across the globe because, as you mentioned, cyber knows no borders. We work very closely with law enforcement, Europol. We have a near daily contact. There's quite a bit of information exchange going on. I think in the U.S., one of the problems we may get is sometimes these criminals are acting out of countries where we may not have excellent diplomatic relationships with, and sometimes those law enforcement relationships are strained.
From a federal government perspective, there's lots of coordination and collaboration happening. I should mention that on May 11th, the President issued an executive order on cybersecurity, both for protecting federal networks and critical infrastructure. And there's a section in there that talks about both international deterrence, but also international cooperation, and that has brought a lot of us together in the federal government to document our engagements as well as to outline what we think should be future engagements. From an education and workforce perspective, we're working very closely Five Eyes, our peers, as well as some other countries. Quite frankly, we are further ahead in many respects than they are, so our NICE framework is a framework that many of them want to adapt in their area, which really is ideal because much like the NIST framework we talked about earlier, if we can have a common taxonomy and lexicon and way to think about cybersecurity workforce, it helps institutions like Dakota State, whose students may be working both in the state, across the nation, and internationally as well. Also, the same executive order had 3 sections on cybersecurity workforce, which actually NICE was asked to help lead the development of a report, and one of them specifically did a comparison of how the U.S. is doing with other countries with respect to education and workforce, and I think more information about some of those reports and studies will be forthcoming.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Rodney. Anybody else? Question? Yes, Jim.
I'd like to jump in on that. I had the privilege of giving a keynote here, if some of you may recall, when you opened the center, just a few, the Beacom Center, yeah, a couple months ago. And I have to say, I have a regret in that talk I didn't mention this topic, and I thought about it later. I thought, it doesn't matter how deep your technical skills are, if you can't communicate those skills and persuade people and have the effective analytic skills that you get from studying other things besides technology, you won't be as effective, you will not be as successful in your career, and you won't have as much impact on the broader community. So it's really important that the traditional kinds of learning, whether it's in literature classes, writing skills, conceptual and analytic skills that you might learn in a history class or philosophy class, all these things are very, very useful for people working in the technology space and really indispensable in my opinion. So I wanted to jump in and remedy what I failed to say last time I was here.
I could jump in and just say what happens. Actually, all students in the higher education system in South Dakota and most other states take about half of their degree is actually liberal arts. It's humanities, science, social science. So it gives everyone a smattering. And the definition of general education is usually what do you expect an educated person to know? And then I just wanted to fall back. You've mentioned the soft skills as important for complementing the technical skills. And we do soft skills development, and it's a sort of secret we don't tell our students, but we feed this through student life and student activities, not just in the classrooms, but as we're encouraging you to do things, we're helping you build your soft skills, your communication skills, your critical thinking skills, your team working skills, and so on. But there's a third area of skill that we're just starting to touch on now, which I would call the contextual skills, sort of understanding the context in which the work is being done. Mm-hmm. And I think that will open up, we have a new degree program that we're bringing forward called Cybersecurity and Intelligence, with the appropriate acronym, CSI. We think that might apply and be very attractive to young people. But it has a sort of a forensics, a digital forensics component to it, but also includes an understanding of the world, what's going on in different countries in the world religions, understanding human behavior, understanding criminal networks, maybe even some foreign language, so that would give those students an opportunity to go into some of these broader and different areas of specialization in the workforce. So we are thinking now there are the three components of knowledge and skills that are needed.
I love driving in this morning and seeing your welcome sign in Madison that says, "Discover the unexpected." And it made me think, it didn't say become an electrical engineer, a computer scientist. It takes skills like curiosity, problem solving, teamwork, communication skills, a lot of things that we hear from employers all the time that really makes a good cybersecurity worker, because they need to not only graduate with those skills, they need to be able to apply them over the course of a lifelong career.
Very good. Anything else? Yes, sir. Yeah, Mayor.
Since we have Senator Thune here, and you gentlemen, Nath and lady, are all from industry and education, do you see any barriers from the legislative side that hinders going forward with cybersecurity and so forth?
That's a good question. Go ahead, be tough.
To break ground on the new facility.
Yes.
So there's one hindrance. If we could get that cleared off, I think that would help everyone. It's really about collaboration, at least at the federal level. General Motors has been working with the Auto ISAC, which is an information sharing and analysis center, and that gives us an opportunity throughout the OEMs and other industry participants who are in the transportation to try to all work together to identify threats and focus public policy and regulation to try to enable innovation without putting us at risk. And so that's sort of how we've looked at it and what we've tried to do to address it, at least at a federal level.
An aspect that I would love to see, well, firstly, let me back up. I think the information sharing between the private and the public sector, including the agencies, I think is an all-time high. I think it's come a very, very long way. But I don't think it's enough. What I would love to see is the ability for agencies to be able to declassify data that is pertinent to private sector companies, for us to give us the ability to be first responders. The aspect of declassifying data is very slow still. That's an aspect I think which I think the private sector could use it in a very good manner. I mean, if we had access to it in a timely way.
Yeah.
On that point, it's not necessarily that the data that needs to be declassified in itself is at all, there's nothing directly about it that's secret, but it's the concern about sources and methods. So the idea is like, if I give you a set of IP addresses, you might be able to figure out how I acquired that set of IP addresses. And I think making a risk assessment that's different than the current one, which is, you know what, just having those IP addresses is super valuable to industry. And so I think I agree with you, I think we need to really think about the right balance there. And I think the government is making progress in that area, but it's something that would be helpful. And since I have the mic, I'll just say that my experience is that at the policy level, working with Congress and with the President, I think there's a lot of good things that have happened, and a lot of, in terms of just general IT modernization and just encouraging the government to be more efficient and to use modern technology. So, but I think the problem, it tends to be more in the bureaucracy. So there's a whole set of middle managers in any large institution, including the government, where change is difficult, and so they tend to be resistant to change. And so that, I think, has been our challenge in terms of helping people to move to sort of more modern tools and more modern technologies, is trying to get sort of the procurement machinery and the kind of middle management machinery to be more responsive and more aggressive in getting off of old and outdated technologies and platforms and onto new things that are more efficient and safer to use.
I can tell you, okay, a couple more questions. I can tell you, too, Mayor, just from, as we look at some of these policy initiatives, when we moved the autonomous vehicle legislation last week out of the committee, one of the key considerations is now cybersecurity. And I think that as policymakers, we've got to be thinking, you know, how do we anticipate some of these challenges? Because as pointed out earlier, there are 16 billion handheld devices in the world today. By 2020, there'll be more than 50 billion. And so that dramatically expands the threat surface that's available for hackers to access. And so when we think about autonomous vehicles, we want the manufacturers to be also coming up and thinking through this in advance, and how to install systems in these vehicles and in this technology that protects against those types of threats. It's pervasive. I mean, we have to be thinking about this in every sector of our economy and with everything that we do. Yes. Yes, sir.
Concerning specifically, as you guys kind of touched on a little bit earlier, you guys kind of mentioned that automation is going to take a lot of jobs away, more than it's going to provide. Sort of, I guess, in general, what do you guys think are solutions to that in the future, I guess, as it sort of becomes a prominent issue, and then specifically for people holding positions in corporations here, what skills do you guys think people need to stay valuable in the market? And then specifically for Senator Thune, I guess, what do you think of universal basic income as a solution to that problem? And then past that, what do you think of Hawaii's implementation of universal basic income?
You guys go ahead. You want to take it first?
You know, from my perspective, I would say I don't think automation is going to take away the human jobs, at least in the cybersecurity space. If you look at from a visa perspective, today we deal with literally billions of events a day. There is no number of humans I can put in front of the problem. What we expect to see is automation, data science, machine learning, AI aspects. But the development of that is actually done by humans. So if there was a skill we see actually a shortage of, is data scientists who understand cybersecurity. We see people who have good cybersecurity knowledge, skills, experience. We see mathematicians with data science backgrounds, but an inflection of the two is few and far between to come by. We feel, that is a skill we will grab if there is.
Okay. Anybody else on that?
I'd say over time too, that technological innovation has tended to create more jobs than it's destroyed. And I think that will be true in this realm as well. We talk a lot, with cybersecurity too, about advances with artificial intelligence and the potential impact that could have on job creation. But I think it's important to remember that artificial intelligence in and of itself is not a panacea. I just think that there's going to be a lot of human capital that's going to need to be deployed to address these problems. There's a reason why I think we talk about the gap in cybersecurity, job coverage. The fact that there's 1 million open jobs available, I think that speaks volumes about the human need for folks to be filling those jobs.
I would add that as we look at the amount of data that's being collected in technology today, we're just scratching the surface on what that is. And by collecting more and more data, we need more of those individuals to understand, interpret that data. It creates opportunities for efficiency, like we're saying, but it also creates opportunities for people to use that data for different aspects of the business, improve the bottom line, and even improve society as a whole as we figure out what that is. So it's important to keep that in mind, and it's going to shift the skill set from what it is today to probably a little bit more technical, but I think we've all accepted that that's where things are going anyway. So we just need to continue to embrace that and move forward.
Yeah, and I would say, we even look like this issue, again, come back to last week, autonomous vehicles. We had at one point contemplated, in fact, we were going to include trucks in that legislation. And then the trucking industry, but the trucking unions were concerned about whether this would lead to job losses for truckers. And the idea that we're going to have level 5 autonomous trucks out there anytime soon, that's way down the road. But I do think that these technologies are disruptive, and they're going to create change. But out of change, in many cases, as we experienced, I think, with a lot of the technological transformations that we've seen in the last couple of decades, they lead to new, in some cases, better paying jobs. And so I think the challenge for us is the workforce question about how do we, as we look at what that future is going to look like, how do we get our workforce equipped and skilled and ready for that challenge. And with respect to your question on universal basic income, I think that the market is, you want people who are high achievers. You want to be able to reward that. The Jeff Bezos of the world, or the companies, the startups that have done so well, have flourished in this country because we have a system that encourages innovation and entrepreneurship. And I think when you create demand for jobs, wages go with that. I think when the market functions efficiently, and what we want to do is continue to grow and expand our economy in a way that creates demand for jobs. And when that happens, if you got, as is true in most free markets, where there's a demand for labor, the price for labor goes up, and it leads to better wages. So that's sort of my view on that. All right, one more question, and then we'll break this up. Yes, sir.
I got the questions back here. I'm sorry. Chuck Losant, Vice President of operations, IT operations, a financial institution. So I'm very interested in what some of our leaders in the financial world have been doing. Going back to what was mentioned a little bit earlier with Equifax, that was Apache Struts patching issue. Patching has become as common as brushing our teeth. What's being done on the preventative side with manufacturers and software development, manufacturers of hardware, software, to raise their standards so that we're not patching as much as we do? Is there anything that can be done, and if so, how do we address that?
Well, I guess I'll start with that one because I kind of live that. I feel like some days when you look at it from a security perspective, there is a lot of overhead associated, not just with our development of software, but how we deploy it and manage it properly. So we've put a lot of focus on really trying to automate it. We're also expanding into cloud computing, internal cloud computing for us because of the security concerns that we're not quite comfortable with to branch out into things like Amazon.
You'll get there.
But we're looking at that. And that level of automation, when we get to cloud computing, where you look at things like platform and infrastructure as a service and those types of things, are really going to be boons to us to helping combat that type of situation. But until then, we really focus on our ability to try and automate those best we can.
This is not the answer you're looking for, but one of the nice workforce categories is operate and maintain, and that includes network administrators, system administrators, those who are kind of in the front line. And it's imperative that they have their security work in order as well, and that includes patching and making sure their system's up to date. But again, to revert to something I've said, and by the way, operate and maintain is the #1 job demand category with respect to cybersecurity work, but that other category I talked about is securely provision. And it's pretty obvious the type of work that can be done in that space, but I think a topic that others here might be better to address is whether or not organizations make that a priority as part of their product development lifecycle.
I'd like to jump in that, first of all, I think it's really unfair to blame some of these things on individual error. I think something systemically is wrong if one person's error can cause a major, major problem like that. And just to give an example of automation, you're gonna keep hearing that theme over and over again. So for example, when the Heartbleed bug, which some of you may be familiar with, so it was a bug in a very commonly used software library, an OpenSSL framework. Because of automation, when that bug was revealed or exposed some 18 or 20 months ago, we actually had deployed some of that software in our cloud platform. So we're talking about a massive global platform. We were able to fix that bug in less than 24 hours. Every single system that used that library had been updated. So, and that's just purely because of automation. You can't do that with the human systems where people have to go log in and type commands. So that's where we all want to get to. Or even if you can't patch something like struts, if everyone was using a web application firewall, you can put a rule into a firewall that says, don't permit this weird URL to actually hit that. So you don't have to patch the system. If you have the right types of tools in place, you can first protect the system from those types of problems and then go patch. So there are technological problems to these solutions to these problems, and that's why I, at the very beginning, said I think we're still very much in the remediation phase. We're really not doing a good job doing the basics right now. And when we get to that point, then so many of these problems will diminish. We'll still have problems, and there'll still be challenges, but it's not, the primary issues we're seeing are not because people are doing security well and still getting compromised. That's almost never the case. It's usually they're doing it very poorly and they get compromised. So we all have to work together on that remediation as a community, as an industry, as government, as educators.
My view is I think in any good company you go to, people will always make mistakes. Software will always come with bugs. Hardware crashes every now and then. But if this happens in the cybersecurity space, we have to ensure it doesn't result in a breach. And what I hope to see is, in the future, in the near future, a development of self-defending, self-healing sort of application systems and networks, where a particular system or an operating system realizes it's vulnerable to an exploit, goes against a database of CVEs, brings down the patch automatically, loads and reboots itself without human intervention. It's possible. There has to be a good deal of research effort put into it. But given the kind of breaches that we have seen in the ecosystem in the past few years, this is inevitable, directionally.
Can I just have one thing too? Security is something I think that our users expect us to deliver out of the box, and that's reasonable, and I don't expect that to change at any point in the near future. But with the growing array of threats that we face, it's also true that security is a shared responsibility, and I think one of the bigger challenges for our industry is deploying usable security for ordinary people. I mentioned two-step verification and two-factor authentication in 2017, and I still get blank looks, and that's totally okay, and nobody needs to be embarrassed. It's not a shaming exercise. But that's on us as an industry. And one of the things that we're trying to do, and we have deployed two-step verification, and for those of you who aren't familiar with it, it's your username and password, something you know, and then something you have, usually your device, where a code gets sent to you, or a text message in some cases as well. We need to make that easy, intuitive, and where feasible, deployed by default, so that people don't have to think about these types of things when they're choosing whether to use our products and services. It's a challenge for a company that wants users to avail themselves of our products and services. We don't want to create barriers of entry to use our products, but at the same time, they have to be safe and secure. So we're investing a lot in terms of authentication and usable security. I think that's an area where we can really benefit in terms of partnerships with government. I know that's something NIST spends quite a bit of time on. But that's going to be a real challenge too. We want to make sure that users are empowered and they're thinking about digital hygiene. I think in the same way I think somebody mentioned before about brushing their teeth. It's something that you do every day. It's routine. It has benefits even if you don't appreciate them right away.
Thank you. Dr. Griffiths, anything for the
No, I
close
think
the
this
record?
is very helpful. I think we've, some of the things that we've heard today, we're already sort of moving forward with. Other things we'll I'm sure, be having conversations about once you leave. But we really appreciate your coming, and I think it's been very, very helpful to our community to hear you say these things. We've had a lot, perhaps in some respects, a lot more interaction with government agencies than we have with the private sector, so it's really nice to have representatives of each here at the table today. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
I want to thank all our panelists really for being here, and you're absolutely right, and we want to make sure that as DSU develops that capability and continues to churn out students with the skills to go into government and NSA and all those important missions, that there are opportunities in the private sector as well that I think are going to continue to emerge and grow and flourish. So we are grateful for your participation today, and I will tell you that in our offices in Washington and here in South Dakota, our IT person is a graduate of Dakota State University, Nick Buddy, who's always telling me to do my digital hygiene and update my passwords and all that sort of thing. But this is important work that's being done here, and we want to be good partners at every level, and that's I think hopefully what comes out of this today is that there are enormous opportunities for the young people who come here to get trained and are going to be making major contributions and having a major impact on this country and our world. So thank you all for being here, and thank you all for being here. Let's give these folks a hand. Say.